React Query has just gotten a really nice update that makes it play super well with the new Next.js app router. This update allows you to stream in data that is fetched on the server, pass it to the client and show it in real time as the data comes in to the user. And people are really excited about this new change. Let's take a look at an example. In the past, to show beautiful loading state animations while our children are rendering, we would use a pattern like this. In the parent, we would use a suspense component with a fallback of whatever loading state you want, like a loading skeleton, a loading spinner, that would go right here. And this fallback will be shown while this async function that we're passing as a prop to the child is being awaited inside of the child. That's what allows us to wait for this asynchronous action we're awaiting in the suspense. And then whenever this function, this await data is done fetching, the fallback we're showing from the suspense is getting replaced with the actual child. Let's look at React Query's implementation. That was unheard of before. We're gonna mark this as a client component. We're inside of a regular page and import two things, suspense and the use query. Then we're gonna get a base URL. Don't worry about this. We just essentially determine which endpoint we want to make a request to, whether we're in production or in local development. It's not important at all. And then we're gonna make a use query. If you've ever worked with React Query before, this syntax is gonna look really familiar to you. We've got a query key and a query function, the way more important part. In here, we're first gonna determine the URL we want to make a request to, or a certain API endpoint where we just wait for a certain amount of time. So literally the API endpoint that we're making a request of, the only purpose is to wait for the amount that we specify in the wait search parameter. That is going to be right here. So 500, we're going to just delay the API response by 500 milliseconds, and we're just making a request to that. Okay, the really important part is the suspense true. That's really, really important so we can stream in the data to the DOM. And then we're going to return the query data as a string and the query from this. Now this function, the useWait query, is never actually run right now. You can see that it's grayed out. That means we're never calling it. So let's do that inside of a my component that just shows how much or how long we've waited for. That's the only thing this does, and render out a bunch of those components in the actual page. That means for each component that we are displaying on this page, we can just pass a wait amount that's going to make a request to our API and wait for that amount of time. And then we can show the loading state inside of the fallback. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Let's see right here. And you can see the data is being streamed in. If I change this to something like a wait 1000, or actually let's change this to 5000 so it will be even more clear. Let's see. Let's reload the page and you can see this resolves, and the 5000 second obviously takes a lot longer to resolve. So you can see the data is being streamed into the DOM. Let's change this to 50 so it will be really fast. And then also let's have one 10,000, so we're gonna wait for 10 seconds for it to work. Let's reload the page and this resolves really fast, pretty fast as well in 500 milliseconds. And then we're waiting for all the data to arrive and we're going to show a loading spinner in the or around the favicon while the data is still loading. And there it is. So we can beautifully stream in the data using this pattern with React Query. This was not possible before. Now you might be wondering, how does this work? Why does this work in my app but not in your app? So the reason is I'm using a very experimental alpha version that they just released a couple days ago and wrap my entire app in something called a React Query Streamed Hydration. And what this component does, we can kind of see that if we hover over it. This component is responsible for hydrating the query client on the server. I think that should be on the client, and then dehydrating the query client on the server. So essentially we can now pass the query client from the client to the server and back in a dehydrated state, which essentially just means serializable data. We could take a look at implementation details, but to be honest, I tried that for 2 or 3 hours earlier today, and it is pretty confusing. For example, right here, this is some server-only code. I'm not gonna get too deep into it, but essentially we're keeping track of the query client state server side as well. So if we fetch data on the server side, then pass it back in a serialized format, in a dehydrated state to the client, then we can ensure that we don't fetch that same data again on the client because we already have it populated in our cache. And here's the process in an overview. If we navigate to our page, we are rendering our page.tsx, which triggers our useWait query automatically because the components we use to run this are not rendered conditionally. So as soon as we visit the page, these are rendered, triggering this useWait query right here. And that makes a request to our waiting API endpoint, gets back a response after the specified amount of time that we specify, and puts that into a cache of the query client that we can then also keep track of on the server. I really hope you enjoyed that example. Thanks a lot to Chisa for letting me know in Discord about this change, or I might have missed it. That's gonna be it for me for this video. Let me know down below what you think about this. I think it's pretty cool, and a lot of other people do as well. I'm gonna see you in the next video. Have a good one, and bye bye.